Oh my goodness, you are such an inspiration. Wow, you really are. You're so strong. Can I pet your service dog? Ugh. 1, 2, 3, let's go! We are artists, parents, teachers, good guys, bad guys, students, leaders. I'm not your inspiration, yeah, I'm fully who I am. Got my own expectations that don't fit into your plans. I'm not your sad story, so I wrote it in this song. Everything you know about disability is wrong. Yeah, everything you know. Yeah, everything you know about disability is wrong.
Hey listeners, welcome back to a new episode of Everything You Know About Disability is Wrong.
In today's episode, we have the amazing actress, singer, and disability rights advocate, Jenna Bainbridge.
In 2024, Jenna became the first wheelchair user to perform in a new musical on Broadway when she made her debut in Suffs, which won the 2024 Tony Award for Best Book and Best Music. She can also be seen in NBC's Found, and you can hear her narrate the audiobooks for Marieke Nijkamp's Unbroken and Alice Wong's Disability Intimacy. Before we get started with the interview, which I'm so excited for, let's do our audio descriptions. Erin, you want to start?
Sure. So, I'm Erin. I am a white woman. I have red hair, and I'm in a white t-shirt, and I'm in my bedroom, which has red walls and a closet behind me. And I'm sitting in my wheelchair.
I'm Lily. I am a white passing mixed race woman with brown hair and green eyes. I'm wearing my usual all black outfit with my gold jewelry that I will fidget with throughout the course of the interview. And I'm in my office where, depending on the view of the screen, you can see a bunch of great disability books behind me, as well as a ton of STEM toys. Jenna, you want to go ahead and give your audio description?
Yeah. I'm Jenna. My pronouns are she, her. I am a white woman with dark hair pulled back, wearing a red muscle t-shirt. I am sitting in a room with artwork behind me. So there's, you can sometimes see a sign that says, "I love you, a bushel and a peck," which is one of my favorite lines from Guys and Dolls.
Before we started recording, listeners, I told Jenna that my childhood home has a sign that says almost the exact, well, it has the exact same quote, but it's gray instead of red. But I love that quote.
It's a very, very good one. This was a gift from my husband for Valentine's Day one year.
Oh, that's a great gift. I love that. And yeah, I love any kind of theater references. So this is going to be a really fun interview.
Oh, good, because I'm full of them.
Oh yeah, I'm so excited. This is when we found out you were going to be on this podcast, I was like geeking out. It's so cool. My degree is in theater. I think theater is so cool, and you're really doing the thing. So I'm so excited. Let's get into the interview portion. Yeah. Erin, you want to take us away?
This podcast is called Everything You Know About Disability is Wrong, and we want to know, what do people get wrong about you and your disability?
I think one of the big things that people get wrong about me, I am an ambulatory wheelchair user, and I think there's a lot of preconceived notions about what that means. I think when I'm using my wheelchair, there are a lot of expectations that I am a full-time chair user without the ability to walk or stand. And then I think when I am walking, people assume that I either don't need my wheelchair or that like it's a bad thing if there's a day where I am using my wheelchair. And none of those things are true. I use my wheelchair as I really view my wheelchair as like freedom for me. I love my wheelchair. I think my wheelchair is the coolest. And what it allows me to do is move through the world much freer. It's faster for me. It also means that when I walk, I have a very pronounced limp and I tire out very quickly. So my wheelchair means that I can go further, and especially living in New York now, New York is a very inaccessible city and forces you to walk most places, even if you are if you're taking the subway, chances are you are not going to be within a few blocks of wherever your final destination is. If you are driving, the parking garages are all very far apart. There is really no street parking. So the idea of like getting to where you're going, is being able to walk into the building, doesn't exist. So my wheelchair allows me to bridge that gap between where did transit take me and then where is my final destination. So I love, 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 love my wheelchair. And also it allows me to just feel good. If there's a day where I'm like, you know what, I don't need to spend this much energy just trying to like walk and deal with whatever my body's going to be doing, I can use my wheelchair instead and just save myself the mental and physical exhaustion. But also, I am very active walking. I'm able to walk. I'm able to do stairs. I'm able to jump. I'm able to ski. And I think that people expect it to be more of a binary of either walking or wheeling and nothing in between. And I live 90% of my life in that gray area in between the two.
Yeah, that gray area I feel like is a like recurring theme on this podcast where
Yes.
we talk about that like people love to classify and just like feel like they've checked a box of like I understand this identity. And because of that, I feel like disability is never no one's disability is the same, even if you have the exact same disability. Your experience of it might be different, and I think that freaks people out. And just like people have a hard time accepting that like this is my experience, and just because you think you understand it, it might change from day to day. That's a hard thing for people to understand, and we've definitely talked with multiple guests about similar experiences of that, like being pushed into a binary. And I really like what you bring up about the like when you choose to use your wheelchair, it's giving you that freedom for that day. And it's just like, so you don't have to spend all of your energy. You don't have to do this. I think that there is kind of I don't know if misconception is the right word, but this concept where like, if you can do something, you must.
Yes.
And yeah, like that kind of like, well, if you can walk, why aren't you doing it all the time?
Right. And it's like that walking is the goal. And like, it's so not the case. The goal is to feel good. The goal is to like have a good day and do whatever I want to be doing. The goal is not walking. The goal is to hang out with my friends. The goal is to do my job. The goal is to, go to dinner. It's not to make sure I walked as I did that.
Yes, I speak on that. I love that. That's so important because I feel like, yeah, there's this kind of like, we don't talk enough about how you don't just have to accommodate yourself for the bare minimum. You can actually accommodate yourself to the point of enjoyment, to the point of pleasure. Like you should be able to enjoy life. And we talked about this a bit in some of our disability pride episodes, just talking about how like accommodating yourself can bring about that sense of pride because you are telling your brain and your body that like my experience is worth it. It's worth it for me to have peace and comfort. Like that's so important.
Yeah, and like I don't know why society puts this big like emphasis on walking in general. Like they had this, I don't know if you've seen it on the Olympics. They had that exoskeleton that you can put on that helps you walk. And I'm just like, that seems really slow. I hear it's very painful. But like, why? Use a wheelchair. It's so much faster and easier.
And it's comfortable and it's built for your body and for your physical needs. Like, why are we so obsessed with walking when sitting is not a bad thing? Like, but we've like, I don't know. I internalized so much of it for so long, as we all do. Like, internalized ableism is a real thing. And for so long, because I can walk, I was convinced that I should not use a wheelchair except for in like extreme circumstances. So for most of my life, the only time I would use my wheelchair was like, I'm going to the zoo. or like I'm going to the airport, like places that were so inaccessible to me, that involved so much walking, that like I physically couldn't access them without my wheelchair. And it took me so long to realize like that same mindset of, oh, I access this better from my wheelchair, I can use every day of my life. It doesn't have to just be extreme circumstances. I don't have to keep doing this painful thing of, the exoskeleton of forcing myself to walk, when I could just sit down and wheel and end up going to the same place and doing the same thing, but easier.
Yes, I love that. I don't have to force myself. I think that idea crosses over into like so many different aspects of disability. I think from like a neurological disability standpoint, we talk about like in the many different categories under neurodiversity, we talk about masking a lot, and it's a kind of a similar concept of that, like, as a high masking person, I can get through a day without my stim stuff. I can force myself to make a lot of eye contact. I can practice like scripts of what I'm going to say, but it's exhausting. It's really, really exhausting to try to pretend like this part of me doesn't exist. And I think that you saying all that was the first time I've kind of thought about for ambulatory wheelchair users. There is that kind of pressure to mask as like, I don't need it. I don't need it unless I really, really need it.
Right. And it's interesting because I feel like it's masking both ways. Like if I'm walking, I am masking as like, I don't need accommodation, which is still untrue, but I think that's how people view me, of like, oh, great, you're walking, so you're able to do this. We don't need to do anything for you. Our physical structure is fine. We don't need to change anything. It's masking in that way. It's being like easy to digest disability. But on the other hand, I am an anomaly. People stare at me as I'm walking and they are confused about like trying to label me as something. Whereas as soon as I start using a device, whether that's my wheelchair or my cane or my crutches, I can see it in people that they're suddenly more comfortable with me because they can label me as, oh, you're disabled. And it's such an interesting thing that like, depending on what I have the energy for when it comes to interacting with strangers on the street, sometimes I choose walking or using a cane or using my wheelchair because like of just the way that people react to me. And that's exhausting too. I don't want to have to be thinking about like, all right, when I get to the restaurant, is it going to have to be a whole conversation where suddenly like whoever's seating me is going to be like, oh, like what happened to you? I don't want to have that conversation. I don't want to shut that down. And if I'm walking, that is the conversation every time. If I'm using my wheelchair, that's the conversation some of the time. And it's an interesting thing to have to like balance that in addition to my physical needs for the day. Sometimes I'm also thinking about like, all right, what are my emotional needs going to be today, just in like dealing with other humans?
Yeah, that's a great example of like the mental load of ableism. What were you going to say, Erin?
No, I totally understand that. I'm not ambulatory, but like sometimes I just like, I don't feel like dealing with staring and comments, so I'm just trying to stay home. But which I was staying home anyway, so it's not a big deal to me. But there definitely is like the emotional toll of being disabled in public.
Yeah, and that like extra steps in like day planning, taking into account the way people are going to react to ourselves, like just parts of us. Like it's very, yeah, it's just one of those hidden like energy taxes that people don't realize.
Yeah, it's like it's a subtract 2 spoons every time you have to have a conversation about it.
Yes,
right? And
absolutely.
It's like, I just want to be dealing with my physical spoons of like, what do I actually need for my day? And now you keep adding on all of these like dealing with other people. And that it makes you want to like stay home sometimes. It makes you want to like only see the people who you already no. Like
Mhm.
it's so frustrating.
Absolutely. Backing up a little bit, I love in your initial answer, you brought up that you love your wheelchair and that it represents freedom to you. This is something we talk about a lot. I want to read a little part of this is a write up for when you were in Rodgers and Hammerstein's Cinderella. And this is what it says. It says, growing up as a passionate Disney princess fan, Bainbridge loves finding nuggets of disability that you don't expect in her characters. Quote, one of my favorites is Cinderella's in my own little corner lyrics. In my own little corner, in my own little chair, I can be whatever I want to be. My wheelchair represents freedom and the ability to move through the world so much easier, and that song exemplifies that. I just loved that you said that and wanted to bring that into this interview. I'm so glad you already brought this idea into the interview because thanks to language like wheelchair bound and confined to a wheelchair, wheelchairs are just often viewed as this like limiting, awful thing. And honestly, through being friends with Erin, I have completely changed my view as a non-wheelchair user of like, wait, wheelchairs are awesome. Like they're so
awesome.
great. And I always think about Erin, you telling the story of you like being a little 3-year-old zipping around, being able to get your chores done quickly because your chair was fast. And like, that's the type of thing you don't see. So I just love that you already brought that up. And, you know, the question I was going to ask with this quote was like, what is your relationship with your chair like? But you've covered that a little bit. So I guess I'd want to know, what would you say to someone who is just beginning to use mobility aids and is really concerned about that stigma of the like confined to?
Yeah. I very strongly believe that if every single person who could benefit from using a mobility aid used it, the entire world would be better. Right? For so many reasons. Like the big one being that if everyone actually got the access that they deserve and the mobility needs that any tool that they could benefit from, it's going to make everybody happier, right? Because they're actually getting to access the world the way that they need to, and the way that's going to cause them whether that's less pain, less energy, like whatever it may be. Everyone's going to be happier. And it will normalize mobility tools for everybody. My favorite example of this is glasses. We have just, as a society, completely normalized glasses. And mobility, like glasses are at their very core an assisted device, right? Without glasses, people are not going to be able to interact with the world in the same way that they do, right? So, but we as a society have just been like, yep, glasses, normal, great, blanket statement. People wear glasses. And that's the accommodation that they need. And this is just part of life. And if we did that with every single assisted device, then suddenly things like making sure that buildings are wheelchair accessible or making sure that, you know, you've got like T-coils in every single space, right? When you go to a museum, T-coils are just available like easily. Like all of these things would become so normalized that we wouldn't even think about it as being disability. It's just human existence. And I especially think about that with like Capitol Hill and how many people there I think really could benefit from using assistive devices. Like, I just think the whole world would be better because everyone would be thinking about disability as an inevitability and disability as something that every single human experiences, whether directly or the people around them, at some point in their life. And I want everybody to not be scared of that, to just normalize that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that like bringing everyone in kind of goes with what we were saying of that like changing the worldview of like, you don't have to force yourself to endure things. It doesn't make you a better person. And like, I think there are so many, like I have like chronic joint pain. So I use a lot of like compression sleeves and like I wear a lot of knee braces. And for a long time, I would always wear like long skirts if I was wearing my knee brace because I was just like embarrassed because internalized ableism. And I very recently started when I'm like doing comedy on stage where like actively trying to wear shorts when I'm wearing those and not bringing it up, just being like, this is normal. And it is wild how many people are like, yeah, my knees are in pain all the time, but I just don't, I don't think about fixing it. Or, oh yeah, my back hurts every single day. And it's like, what, why do we live in a world that's just telling you to accept that? There's things we live in 2024. There's really cool stuff out there that can help.
Why have we normalized pain instead of normalizing access? Like, this is unhinged.
Yeah, that's a soundbite right there, Jenna. Why have we normalized pain instead of access? That is such a good point. And yeah, I think this has just been a amazing start to this interview, because it's what, our whole thesis of like this whole podcast, that a big part of the everything you know about disability is wrong is that like most people don't accept or admit to themselves that like disability is inevitable. Disability is natural. It's actually like humanity.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. I've noticed all of these like euphemisms about disability that I hadn't seen before. And one of them was, there was a housing development that I saw recently that they had all of this language about like built for aging in place. And I was like, this is just a euphemism for disability. You are selling me on this idea of like, don't you want to be able to stay in your house, buy your house now and you can stay here all the way through retirement, all the way through old age. And like what you're saying is through disability. But we're not going to, it's such an interesting thing that people don't want to name it for what it is. And they're calling it all of these weird euphemisms when if we were to just say the word and normalize the word and normalize the experience, then it would benefit every single human on this planet because it is part of life.
Absolutely. Yeah, like the euphemisms for disability get like more ridiculous every year.
Yes.
I feel like differently abled.
Ugh.
Don't diss my ability.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
gross.
So gross. And I feel like the aging in place is such a good example that we don't really think of as like one of those euphemisms. And same thing with like, I feel like the world is becoming more accepting in the last like decade even of like mental health, but mental health language has become okay. But like referring to these things as psychiatric disabilities is like people get really up in arms. And for me, I was, before my autism diagnosis, I was very in the thick of the mental health community because shocker, when you have undiagnosed autism, you usually have a lot of mental health problems. And in the mental health world, there was this underlying like language of like beat this, overcome this. And then as soon as I entered disability world and met amazing disabled people and kind of became immersed in disability culture, it was like, oh, I don't need to beat anything. I need to accommodate myself. And like mental health days that work is giving out, those are disability accommodations actually.
Yes.
And they're important.
Yes. And just all of that language of like, beat this, like why? Like, why is that the language? Why not just accept this? Like, meet yourself, like wherever you are today, just meeting yourself at that place is actually the accommodation. And we're so obsessed with like, well, one day you won't need to do that. Like, but what if I do? That's not a bad thing.
Yeah. Yes to everything said so far. And I really hope that the trend of like accommodating yourself just starts to become more normal. And yeah, if you're listening and you have considered using something to accommodate yourself but didn't want to, maybe this is your catalyst to do it.
Do it. And like every single time that we make an accommodation for ourselves, it shows somebody else that they can make an accommodation too. So every single time that another person starts doing that, it normalizes it for the future. Like, it's the best thing that we can do, not only for ourselves, but for every single person around us.
Absolutely. Wow. What a great section 1 of this interview. That was amazing. And I feel like it really, just agree with everything. And I'm so excited for someone to hear that who really needed to.
I hope
Let's
so.
dive in. No, what were you going to say?
Oh no, I hope that if somebody needed to hear today, like, it's okay. Put on a knee brace. It's okay. Like, ask your doctor for a script for a wheelchair. Like, do it. Do it. If you think you need it, you need it.
I also want to say, if my father is listening to this podcast, please get hearing aids. Please.
Please.
He's like, no. I'm like, you can't hear anything. And it'll change your life.
Man, that could be a whole episode, Erin, talking about the ways that masculinity and like capitalism's individuality have like set back accommodating yourself and accessibility, because there's this I do think that there's a lot in masculinity that could be unpacked that is probably rooted in ableism. But
Oh yes.
we'll let some men deal with that. But you should work through that, men.
Well, and also, right, men, please work through this. But also, like, the way that dateability and ableism are intertwined is also just a fascinating and gross, like, subculture. Like, I remember my physical therapist when I was in, I think I was in like middle school, and my physical therapist was like, "Don't you want to be able to walk normally when you enter high school, and when you want to start dating? Don't you want to be able to, like, walk normally?" And what that ingrained in me was like, oh no, if I still have a limp, which, by the way, I am always going to have. That was never actually on the table to, like, physical therapy my way out of a limp. That's just, I have a spinal cord injury. This is what it is. And what it ingrained in me, though, was like, oh no, I am unlovable if I am still presenting as disabled, right? I would always have a disability, but it was this idea of like, if I can just mask it enough, then I will be worthy of love. And like, all of these ideas getting intertwined, whether it's like, I'm not a man if I use hearing aids, or I'm unworthy of love if I put on a knee brace. It just means that people learn to not like themselves, and to think that the people around them won't like them either. And none of that is true.
Absolutely. I'm glad you brought up that, like, the through line there, because it's all intersectional, and we see how ableism plays into so many other issues at hand. Just great points all around.
In our first season of the podcast, we had the main theme of all the episodes was dating and relationships. So if you're listening to this right now, go back to our first season and check it out. This is really great conversations there.
Yeah, and there's some really like enlightening stuff about those. Exactly what Jenna was talking about, that kind of like these weird things that people who think they're helping us say that then get ingrained to mean I am not worthy or I am not lovable, which is really devastating. And I do hope it goes into the, when you accommodate yourself, you like are teaching others that it's worth it to accommodate yourself, and fight back against those voices, whether real people or in your head, saying that you shouldn't take care of yourself because it'll make you less of something, which I disagree with wholeheartedly. I think the more you take care of yourself, the more you can be you.
Yes, and the more you taking care of yourself is a form of self-love and self-care. And the more that you love yourself, the more that other people are able to love you, and you are able to love other people.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love that. It's so important. We could talk about this I could just stay on this topic the entire interview, but I want to get into some of, the cool stuff that you do. So I'm trying to decide which questions I want to ask, because I think we could talk for a long time. I have a question specifically related to Suffs. which listeners, if you don't know about this musical, you got to learn about it. It's so cool. Suffs is the story about the women activists who fought for the right for women to vote. And it's honestly a story that like feels weird that I didn't learn in school. Like,
yes.
When I was, doing research for this interview, there's like names of characters and stuff that I'm like, why do I know like Thomas
I should
Edison,
know who this
but
is.
I don't know these people? Like, why do I know all these men, but I don't know these people? It was less than 100 years ago. And I'm interested in how being in this musical and learning about these women's stories, has that furthered your goals at all as a disability advocate, like being around these stories of activism, or just interested in how like the story of the musical is influencing your work?
Yeah, it's interesting because I've always been a pretty passionate activist, in my own way, in my own world, in my own relationships. And Suffs is really about it shows so many of those through lines of how when you work with like-minded people, how much can be accomplished. And you bring up that we're not taught this story in school. We don't know the names of Alice Paul or Inez Milholland or Carrie Chapman Catt. Like, these are not names. In fact, one of the big name drops we have in Suffs is Susan B. Anthony. But most of us learned who Susan B. Anthony was, but Suffs takes place a full generation later. Like, we talk about Susan B. Anthony, and she is already long dead by the time that we are really diving into the story in Suffs. But when Susan B. Anthony was advocating for the right to vote, it was the kind of history that people want to put in the books, right? It was like, oh, this was peaceful, and we had these conventions, and then we got the right to vote. And that's not the reality. The reality was there was protest. There was violent protest. There was women were jailed and went on hunger strikes. And these are parts of history that, it doesn't make the US government look great. And so therefore, it doesn't get written down into the history books. We have so much power when we protest. We have so much power when we come together in groups with like-minded individuals. And that's really what this story focuses on, is there are always going to be people who you can team up with to accomplish great things. And there are things that you can do alone. And a true movement really needs all of those things. Working with your friends, sending a letter to a single person can have a huge impact. Just protesting in the street silently, which you have every right to do, is deeply impactful. And Suffs really shows a lot of those tactics in a beautiful, beautiful way. And what it has meant for me is it has reminded me that any method has impact. You don't have to necessarily go to the protest if you don't have the energy for that. That's okay. If you need to access it by, just sending an email to your lawmakers, that has impact. If you need to access it by, retweeting it to tell other people this is happening, that has an impact. All of these things matter. And it's what I really loved about Suffs is showing every tactic is important. And also, one of the beautiful through lines in Suffs is that self-care is also important. There is a time where it is okay. Protect yourself. You don't need to give everything to these moments, because if you give all of yourself, you don't have anything left. So take the breaks when you need them. Listen to your body, listen to your heart, listen to your soul, and rest is as important as the work.
Absolutely. And that, doing anything is important, but you got to do something. Send that email, hit retweet, whatever it is, if you can just get yourself to do something, you can make a difference. I think, yeah, it's really poignant, talking about all of that with in the lens of like disability history, because disability history as well just doesn't really get taught in schools. And I often think about like Judy Heumann and the 504 sit-ins, and those are exactly what you're saying. They're messy. They're not like this beautiful, peaceful thing that happened. They were messy and showed a lot of issues within our government, and so we don't really learn about it. And I think that there's probably some ableist viewpoints that make people worried, like, well, if these people can do it, anyone can. And like, while I don't condone that kind of narrative, I do condone that, like, yeah, we can all gather, especially in 2024 with the internet. While I wish the internet was available to everyone, I acknowledge that it's not. But there's some kind of organizing you can get into if you are freaking out about the state of the world or the state of access. And there's always something that can be done, even if it's just figuring out some history that you didn't know about, going and seeing Suffs and talking to your friends about what you learned, and how that, having the conversation we're having right now of like, how has the history of these women inspired us today and what we
Right.
can do.
Right. And it also just proves, like, just because you don't see yourself in the history doesn't mean you weren't there. Because simply by proof of the fact that we didn't learn the history of these suffragists, it didn't mean it didn't happen. And, Shayna Taub, our incredible writer and star of Suffs, she and I had a conversation about, she looked so hard to try and find disabled American suffragists that we could name in the show. And there's just not a lot of history. There's not a lot of evidence of who was there, but we know they were. And so by sheer fact that I am on that stage, it shows people, like, we might not know the name of the people who protested, who maybe used mobility devices, but they were definitely there. People with disabilities were part of this movement. People with disabilities have been a part of every single movement. So just because you can't see yourself in the history, know that you were there, and also know that you can be a part of the next movement.
Claps for that. That's really good. That's really good, Jenna. That's just really good. And like, we talk a lot on this podcast about inspiration porn and, becoming an inspiration as a disabled person. And like, we recently had the conversation of kind of reframing that as like inspiring other disabled people. Like, if we keep it within the community, it starts to feel good.
Yes.
And I feel like that this is a good conversation within that, of that, like, the inspiration is to accommodate yourself, be inspired to accommodate yourself. The inspiration is to get involved, even if you didn't think that someone like you could be involved.
Mm-hmm. And outside of the community too, like, I'm okay if I inspired you to rethink what disability is, then I'm fine being your inspiration. If my presence on that stage as a dancer made you realize that people with disabilities are fierce athletes, then I'm okay to have inspired you. I am not okay to have inspired you if your takeaway from me dancing on stage is, well, I guess I can't complain about my life, then I did not inspire you.
Yeah, that's a great way to put that. She said, yeah, I can inspire you, but not just for existing. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, if I publish a book, or if I do something worth, admiring, that's fine. But it's the whole idea of, oh, you've been outside your house. How inspiring. Like,
oh my gosh,
no,
you existed in the world, even though I am ableist and didn't expect to see you here.
Right, exactly.
It's not inspiring.
No.
It's such a good follow-up question, though. Like, if someone's saying like they're inspired to do what? Like, what? what is the like, I've never really thought about that, like in the definition of inspiration. They're like, okay, if I'm inspiring you, it means I'm like motivating you to do something or I've changed, like whether that something is a change of thought. But like, yeah, that's a great way to combat that kind of, if you get told that, like, oh wow, you're so inspiring. Oh, what have I inspired you to do?
Yeah. Oh, did I inspire you to call your lawmakers to make sure that all of the buildings in this area are accessible to me? That's great. Thank you. I'm so glad you're going to call tomorrow. Did I inspire you to suddenly not be so ableist? Did I inspire you to watch the Paralympics as much as you're watching the Olympics? Great. I'm glad I inspired you.
I love that. That's awesome. And that's just so good. I'm going to keep that in my head because it's so good when you can come up with the like, ooh, this is going to be my response to that. And it's going to shake them up.
Yeah. I always love whenever people say something that like hits me weird, I always follow it up with a question of like, why? How? Because it turns it back to them. Like if it hit me in that way, I need you to talk through what you think you're saying to me. And maybe, just maybe, it'll make you realize that what you've said was harmful.
I saw something, I wish I remembered who posted it, but I saw something online the other day of, when someone asks like, what happened to you? Responding to that with like, wow, it seems really important for you to know that. Like, like that kind of almost like the gentle parenting approach. Like, oh, why is that so important to you? Like that. And so I really like that kind of investigating, staying curious, but really being like, all right, let's have you point out your own ableism here.
Yeah, let's talk through what you just said without me having to spend any energy on this.
Well, we have a lot of stuff I want to ask about still. I don't know if we'll get to it all, but one thing that, kind of along the lines of inspiration I wanted to bring up, you and Ali Stroker are historic names in terms of disability representation on Broadway. You're the firsts. And for listeners who don't know, Ali won a Tony in not a new musical. So the difference here is that Jenna is the first in a new musical to be a part of this cast and be a wheelchair user. I always hesitate to just say disability because a lot of people have disabilities that they don't disclose. But
and there are lots of other types of disabilities that have been present in shows.
Absolutely.
Yes.
But
also in new musicals, it's very rare.
Very rare. And so I wonder, like, what is that like? And does the historic nature of your role in Suffs kind of add pressure or excitement? Like, how does that feel for you?
I mean, the thing that was most exciting to me when I was cast in Suffs is historically in new musicals, future productions tend to they tend to look back to the original for future casting. And that happens on Broadway, that happens for regional productions. When you think of a show, you tend to picture the original cast members. And so simply by nature of me existing in this show, what it means is that every future production of it will automatically have an example of including people with disabilities in the show. And that hasn't happened. That has not been the case previously. So what I was most excited by was thinking about if Suffs has ever performed in a high school, that there is a part written into this show that is canonically disabled. And people can look to it and say like, oh, great, there is a role for people with disabilities in this show. And because my role doesn't specify disability, it means that anybody can play this part. Anybody with a disability can feel represented in this show. And that was just so exciting to me to think that, perhaps, like, obviously I'm not in casting. I don't know what the future is, but I do feel that in future productions, there is at least a precedent that has been set. And hopefully it means that there is the possibility of future productions casting people with disabilities. And I also know that there is a fully wheelchair accessible track on Broadway. No matter what happens, my part is fully wheelchair accessible. And it has been blocked that way, and it will continue to be performed that way, regardless of if anybody else has a disability in that track. It was built to be accessible.
That's gotta feel good.
It does. It feels really good. I feel like I've at least laid down a path. Even just knowing that path is there means a lot to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And in your initial like information to us about this podcast, I love that you put in it that like I am equal parts a theater maker and an advocate. Like these are equal parts to me, and I'm happy to talk about either. And it's so cool that with this path you've created, you've truly embodied like both aspects of those two parts of you that are really important to you. And so other people can follow suit. I think that's so important because there's sometimes when glass ceilings get broken, it can feel like a box has been checked. Like, okay, cool, we've seen this representation. Now we don't have to worry about it. And I love what you said. That's like, no, this is actually opening like okay, now if you do this show without disability, you're missing something that was in the original production. It's crucial to the story. I think that's really, really important. And I think, yeah, just accessibility on Broadway is super important. Erin, do you want to dig into consultability? Because I know we want to talk about that in this hour.
Yeah, so you co-founded Consultability, and can you tell us a little bit about what that is and why you started it?
Yeah, so Consultability is the consulting company that my husband and I founded. And it's the reason that we started it was I am a disabled actor. My husband is non-disabled, but we met working at Family Theater Company, which is a theater company in Denver that hires exclusively actors with disabilities. At the time, he was the stage manager. He later became the production manager. And we would get questions all the time from people being like, oh, hey, we want to hire somebody with a disability, but we don't know if it will be accessible for them. Can you come take a look? And we would just get these questions all the time of like, how do we make things accessible? And we realized like we should, like there isn't a place, there aren't very many places where you can go and ask those questions. And especially when it comes to theater, because something that a lot of people don't realize is that the ADA doesn't protect most backstage spaces because they are not public facing spaces. And so theaters are not necessarily required to have accessible backstage spaces. And in addition to that, there is most theaters in our country were built before the passing of the ADA. And in a lot of cases, theaters are really surviving because they have like historical landmark status. And when you have historical landmark status, it's very, very difficult to actually become ADA compliant and still maintain your historical landmark status. So there are a lot of nuances to it. And so what Paul and I do is we come into theaters and we show them how they can become accessible, not necessarily ADA compliant. These are different words, but we go in and say, here are some ways that you can make your theater accessible in the short term for maybe not a lot of money, and in the long term with funding and renovation. Because I think a lot of times people think, well, if we can't become fully ADA compliant accessible right now, then we shouldn't do this at all. And they become scared of what questions are we asking, and are we going to offend somebody if we ask these questions? And what we do is we have that space open so that people can ask whatever questions they have and can get a sense of, here's what you can do in the short term to open this door. And here's what you can do in the long term to make sure the door stays open. So we do that through assessments of spaces where we physically walk through the buildings and tell them, here are some of the physical barriers you have to access, as well as through anti-ableism trainings, because it is much more about the mindset of wanting to maintain accessibility than it is actually about making a building accessible. Because we've all seen it. We're like, yes, this building is wheelchair accessible, but the wheelchair access is also where the trash gets left during the day, right? That's a mindset problem. That is that people don't value that the building is accessible and have made it where the trash gets picked up. Whereas having true access would be everybody now uses this accessible entrance, and it is integrated as part of the building and part of the experience. And that comes down to mindset. So we really try to tackle it from both angles. So we do presentations, we do workshops, and we do space assessments to try and have a holistic approach to making something accessible. And because we've both been working in theater and specifically disabled theater for our entire careers, we're also able to address it in ways that are specific to the arts, because theater is a strange mechanism. And it's funny when like corporations come in and they're like, oh, why is theater functioning this way? And you're like, I can't explain it. It's just how it is. And if you don't work within that mechanism, it's hard to figure it out. So we've got, years of experience working in theater and from different aspects. I'm primarily on stage. He's been primarily backstage. And so together we really feel that we're able to answer any question about how do we make this accessible. And it's been a blast. We've really only been around for 2 years, but it's been a really wonderful whirlwind for those 2 years.
That's awesome, and I think great for the way you tackle it from both sides.
Yeah, totally. And do you find that most theater like owners or whatever they're called, are they like very open to it? Has there been any pushback? Anything like that?
Because we're still pretty new, we have primarily worked with companies that have sought us out who are interested in this kind of work, because we are still small. We don't have the capacity to be reaching out to theaters directly yet. So every time that we have worked with a company, it has been very positive. But I also know that is partly because of the sample size we have. So, one of the big things that we do get pushback on is cost. That people say like, oh, well, we really want to do this, but we can't afford it. And what we've really tried to instill in people is that cost is just something that you can budget in. What you're saying, if you're saying we can't afford this, is you do not value disabled work, disabled patrons, disabled dollars. Capitalism is all a big made up mindset, and it's all about where you place value. So if you're saying you can't afford to make your building ADA compliant, what you're saying is you do not value the 20 some odd % of the population that would benefit from those accommodations, from those changes. And this is just about budgeting that in to make something accessible. Disabled dollars talk. And I think historically people think that they don't. Disabled dollars are consistently undervalued, as we have seen in just the fact that, people with disabilities can legally be paid below minimum wage in many states. So it's about rethinking that mindset to think disability is a vital part of our community, and disabled people deserve to have all the same experiences. And if that means it costs you a little bit more money up front, why is that a bad thing? It just means that you're putting that money into making sure a community feels valued.
Exactly. And, I'd almost argue that places can't afford not to focus on accessibility. And I think that business owners and employers in general have to realize that like this is one area where you cannot see the potential of the like patrons who would utilize these entrances or these accessibility features until you do it. But this population exists, but like it's that
if you build
self-fulfilling
it, they will
prophecy.
come.
Yes.
And like I think that if you were to tell a business, 20%, that's a massive number.
Yeah.
To be like, oh, hey, you are alienating 20% of your potential customers.
Yeah.
But I think people don't view it that way, right? People are viewing it as like, oh, I'm only alienating wheelchair users, or I'm only alienating blind people. And it's like, no, we are a whole community. And if we are in solidarity with each other, you are alienating all of us.
Yeah. And it shows how many people you think, or how many people really think that like that, less than 80% of the population is 100% of the population, and that there just like happens to be these other people. But yeah, I think that, and I don't have the data here, but I know in my heart that it exists, of that like there are places that have done these renovations and seen the impact on like the ROI on it, that like when you can appeal to thousands more people, it's going to be a good thing for your business.
Yeah, I want to know what those numbers are. Like I wonder if somebody has actually done that research, because I am sure that the numbers speak for themselves. Like, because we've all seen it just from like word of mouth, of when you hear something is a wonderful experience for your particular access needs, you flock to it. And I think that, even if it's just that our word of mouth experience, like we know this is the case. And I think businesses need to realize like how valuable that is.
Absolutely. I completely agree. And, October is National Disability Employment Awareness Month. So we always talk about, what inclusive employment really looks like. And I think that a good way to make businesses more accommodating and accessible is to hire disabled people on your behind the scenes work. It's disabled people that are going to say, hey, we say we don't have budget for this, but I think we do. Like, I think we can, this is important. And I have this whole group of people who would come do things like, we got to work together. And I do think that inclusive hiring practices, in every aspect of life, can bring about more inclusive spaces. We are very nearly out of time. We end this podcast usually talking about Easter Seal's main pillars, which are community, education, employment, transportation, and health. And I want to bring up, you brought up the Family Theater Company. I think we'll only have time to get to one of these, so I want to talk about the community aspect of theater, because I think it's really beautiful. For many people, and in my experience, theater was that first place that I ever felt like real community, of like working with people who might annoy me or they don't like me, but we're working together to do something, and ultimately we're in a theater company together, so we're going to take care of each other. What do you think people can learn about community and mutual support through theater?
Theater is teamwork at the end of the day. I don't think people realize how much time you spend with each other if you do theater. So for Suffs, we have 8 shows a week. The only day I am not in the theater is Monday. In addition to those 8 shows a week, I'm understudying. So I'm there for 2 rehearsals a week on top of the 8 shows. I am always at the theater. So the people that you work with become your family. And you get really, really close to people really, really fast, because oftentimes you're also, in most theater productions, you're there for between 6 and 10 weeks. Like these are quick turnarounds. Suffs is a different beast. Broadway, it just keeps going. So I've been doing this since February, but before that I've been a part of Suffs for 3 years. So a lot of these people I've known for years and years at this point. And I think that what I love about that is that with each day you get to know people better and you learn more about them. And when you have a really diverse group of people, you start to learn about people's individual experiences, and it makes you a better person, a better, more rounded person, a more educated person, a more compassionate person. Because it's not necessarily people that you would meet on your own. When you're doing theater, you're put together with people who I didn't know a single person my first Suffs workshop. I was flown in from Denver and didn't know anybody else there. And now I would consider everybody to be among my closest friends. And that happens fast. I think that theater becomes a really beautiful community. And what I love about it is, a lot of these really close relationships I've made in past shows, I'll still get calls from friends. I had a phone call with a friend the other day who I did a show with 5 years ago. And she called me because she was working someplace new. And she pointed out something that was inaccessible. And she's non-disabled, has no experience with disability other than like being my friend. And she pointed out something that was inaccessible and they fixed it. Right? So like every single person that you meet carries that experience, that knowledge to wherever they go next. And theater, that is constant turnover. You're working with someone for a few weeks at a time and then they go everywhere. So it's this really tiny community where everybody knows each other to some extent, but also you don't know anybody. So every single person that you meet, every single time you are impacted, that has a ripple effect that carries on forever and ever and ever. And so if you can be that person who speaks truth, who acknowledges injustice, you are making every single place you work better, not just for yourself, but for any future person who comes across it. And I love that about theater, that you can directly see those ripples everywhere you turn.
That is so beautiful. And I think it just wraps up this interview really nicely, because it goes back to what we're talking about at the start of this, that like a part of being in community with others is accommodating yourself and showing that accommodating yourself in front of people, especially, in like a theater setting where you're meeting new people all the time, you're changing people's worldviews. And, I think it's very important to have highly visible disabled people in communities where, and then, that, like you said, the ripple effect of showing that like, well, someone I'm in community with needs this access, so I'm going to speak on it. And I, you dream of the perfect world where people are advocating for people they don't know, but we know the reality. People advocate for their community members. So it's important. And the work you're doing is incredible, changing Broadway. I hope listeners that you've found this interview as beautiful as I have. It's been a lot of fun. Jenna, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, thank you all for having me. I really appreciate it.
It was amazing. I really appreciate everything that you said is like incredible. So we appreciate it.
Yeah. It's always the interviews that you like, I leave being like, wow, I feel so good to be me and like to care about myself. Like that's so good. And that this interview has definitely done that. So listeners, again, hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. Jenna, thank you for being here. And we will see you next time for another episode of Everything You Know About Disability is Wrong.
If you liked what you heard, go ahead and subscribe and leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts.
Thank you to our listeners. And as always, thank you to Easter Seals for giving us the space and resources to share such authentic conversations from within the disability community to our listeners.
And we'll see you next time for another episode of Everything You Know About Disability is Wrong.
Everything you know about disability is wrong.
This is a podcast brought to you by Easter Seals.
We actually work for Easter Seals, but maybe our listeners don't know what we do.
That's true. Easter Seals is leading the way to full access, equity, and inclusion for disabled people and their families.
And did you know we've been doing this for more than a century?
This includes helping disabled people find meaningful employment and addressing healthcare needs for all ages.
We're proud to serve communities across the country and ready for the next 100 years. For more, check out easterseals.com.